How do you obtain permission to film on a public street or even shut down a public road for your film? Welcome back to Filmmaking for Noobs. I'm Kyle Lawrence. In this episode, we are talking specifically about how to go about getting permission to film on a public street or a public road. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about filming actors in a moving vehicle while it's driving. That's likely done using different methods, or possibly even done using what's called poor man's process, which requires just putting a car in a studio or in some kind of warehouse or somewhere, wherever you have access to. But what I'm looking at specifically today is how to go about shutting down a road, or at least inhibiting traffic, in order to set up cameras and lights on a street in order to shoot a scene that takes place on a road. Now, I do have another episode that talks about getting permission to film in all sorts of different locations. If you're just wanting to film on the sidewalk and you're just going to have cameras and lights set up on a sidewalk, then you should refer to that episode and speak with the city or the film permit office or whoever you have to talk to get permission for that. It's a different process. However, this is specifically for actually putting gear, equipment, cast crew on a road in a traffic lane or blocking traffic for the purpose of your film. In 2005, I shut down the main street of a small town in order to film a street racing scene. In 2006, I shut down a small two-lane highway in order to film a car accident scene. For The Scarf, we required a small street in the middle of nowhere. For Logan, we filmed on a small, quiet residential street. And more recently, in No Internet, we required a street for a couple scenes as well. I've also worked on many other shows in other capacities that have shut down busy streets and roads in order to get their shots that they needed. So, based on my experience in actually shutting down streets and highways myself for my own film projects, and also based on my experience for seeing how that process works on other shows, here are many of my findings, and hopefully this will give you some tips and advice on how to go about doing the same for your projects as well, if you do require filming on a street. Each of the 5 times that I've had to shut down streets or highways for my projects, the circumstances for shutting that down were very different from each other. Each of them was very unique in and of itself. Obtaining permission to film on a public road can vary greatly depending on the size of the town that you're in, or the specific town that you're in, how heavy the film industry is in your area, or anything about you and the parameters of your specific project. For the main street that I shut down for a street racing scene, I was in a place that did not require film permits. It was a small town. I had no luck getting permission to shut down streets in larger towns, so I drove a bit farther away from where we were filming, found a small town, and convinced them to let us shut down their main street. The way this process worked was I contacted the city staff. We actually started coordinating this back in August of that particular year, and we ended up not being able to film until November of that year. So it was a long process of dealing with the city. I had to actually go to city council meetings and present my case to the city council, convincing them to allow us to shut down the street for a street racing scene. Because it was a street racing scene, which obviously street racing is illegal, one of the stipulations was that we obviously couldn't do anything illegal while filming on the street that we had closed. So even though we had shut down the street for a street racing scene, we still were not allowed to exceed the speed limit of that street, which obviously was probably a good thing because at the time I was in my late teens and we were just a bunch of, teenagers and young adults who thought street racing was kind of a cool thing. So it's really good that we had to still have safety protocols in place and still abide by the traffic rules, even though we owned the street for that night. The city did allow us to shut down the road from something like 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. and we filmed overnight. It was in November in the Midwest of the United States when we filmed, so it was a very cold night. The city also provided the road closed barricades for us, and we were able to pull off this entire filming on a street overnight at zero cost to us. For the highway that I shut down, that road was controlled by the state's Department of Transportation. So there were a lot of other steps involved in getting permission to shut down this highway. We had to contact the state's Department of Transportation. We also had to contact the 1 or 2 different cities that were right around that highway and affected by the highway. Once again, this took place in a bit more of a remote area with smaller towns around, not near a big city. We once again had no luck convincing larger cities to allow us to shut down larger highways. But this was a small, relatively new highway. It was actually set up in a really nice way that it had an on-ramp, about a 1.5 mile stretch of highway, and an off-ramp, and the highway didn't extend beyond either of those on and off ramps. And so it was a really easy highway for us to detour. It was a brand new highway. Many of the commuters were used to using other roads anyway, and so it made it really simple for us to just shut down that entire stretch of highway. One stipulation that we faced was we could only shut it down outside of rush hour times, and so we shut it down for a few hours during the middle of the day to use it then, but then had to reopen during rush hour, and then we shut it down again at night for the duration of the night once we got past rush hour. Once again, there is no cost for us with the city or with the state's Department of Transportation in order to shut down this small stretch of highway. However, we were responsible for providing our own traffic control and traffic barriers, and that did come with a small cost. Once everything was approved with the city and the Transportation Department, we also had to contact 911 dispatch to make them aware of the highway closure. And once everything's approved, I'd also recommend contacting directly the police and fire departments to let them know. Otherwise, the 911 dispatch doesn't really talk to the departments, and things happen. For the quiet street in the Scarf, we did obtain permission from the city's film permit office. This was already a semi-private street that was kind of part of a park, kind of not part of a park, but there was very little traffic on it and not really much on the other end of it, so there wasn't really anywhere that we were blocking. We were allowed to simply film on the street, and we didn't necessarily have to close it down as long as we allowed other people that needed to get through to still get through. In some situations, I was also able to find long driveways, private streets or private roads which were private property owned by individuals, and able to film there, making it look like a street even when it wasn't really a street, and therefore didn't require permission from a city or require us shutting down any roads. For Logan, we once again were filming in an area that did not require film permits, and so we filmed in a small residential area that didn't have very much traffic at all. We ended up blocking one side of the street with a car and our cameras and equipment, and made sure that we allowed traffic to still get through on the other side of the street. Just watching them kind of, making sure that no one hit anyone. But we really didn't get permission from anyone for that street. So because it was a small residential area with very little traffic and no film permits required in that area, it is a little bit easier to get away with filming on a street. Obviously, you can't block the entire street. We still allowed traffic to get through, but there is a little bit of leeway in making that happen. And if you're wondering about the legalities involved in that, we were actually filming in a portion of the street right in front of a house that we were filming at, and that house was owned by a highway patrol officer, and he had no issues with us filming on the street. So clearly, I don't think anyone really cared. There are situations where you can get away with that, but obviously if you are in an area that does require film permits, then that is going to be a major concern to any law officers if you do not have a film permit and you are on a street filming. And once again, for no internet, we obtained permission through the film permit office. In this situation, we didn't actually shut down the entire street. We instead did what's called ITC, or Intermittent Traffic Control. This is where we're allowed to stop traffic for a 3-minute period of time to do a take, and then we have to reopen the street and allow traffic to get through before we can close it again. Intermittent traffic control is really annoying and frustrating for filming. It did cause a lot of delays for us. We were shooting with some actors on bikes and Steadicam, very little other gear on the street, but it was still really annoying and frustrating having to get everyone to step off the street for a minute to allow traffic to get through, wait for a couple minutes for cars to go by before we could then close the street again and do another take. It was very time consuming, and so whenever possible, whenever you're filming on a street, I would highly recommend actually shutting down the street or the entire road for that scene, not just doing intermittent traffic control. ITC is better when you're actually filming off the street, not directly on the street, and you really just need to stop traffic every once in a while for safety reasons, only for a couple specific shots. But if you're filming an entire scene on the street itself, I highly recommend getting permission to actually shut down the street or finding a different road that you will be allowed to shut down. In areas that do require film permits and are much more film heavy, they are most likely more willing to let you shut down streets and roads, even if they are busier streets and roads. I have worked on other shows as well that have shut down busy city blocks. Most of the time it's usually at night, in the middle of the night when it's not being used by traffic, but I have seen it done during the day as well. It's just a matter of coordinating that and negotiating that with the city or any other government authority that is involved in that street, getting permissions from them and paying whatever fees they want paid, and also having a very good and clear traffic control and detour plan in place so that you can have as minimal impact as possible to the traffic in that area who does need to normally access that street. If you need to film a scene on a street and you're having trouble finding streets, there are a few things that I would recommend. First of all, look for streets that don't often have a lot of traffic. Secondly, you can try going farther away from big cities, find small towns with smaller roads, less traffic, less people. They might be more willing to work with you and allow you to shut down a street for filming. Also, look for private streets. Look for privately owned streets or really long driveways, especially if you're filming, let's say, a 1950s scene of a small truck driving on a small rural road and you don't need anything special. What I did once was I just found a really long driveway that was owned by a private individual, and they allowed us to shoot on their driveway, and it was at night, so we were able to make it look like it was just a small section of a small little road out in the middle of nowhere. So there's lots of things that you can do to find the streets that you need to film on. There's lots of ways that you can go about getting permission. Go to one city, ask for permission. If they say you know about one street, ask about a different street. If you're just not having any luck with a particular city, then go look in other towns and other cities. There's definitely ways to do it and accomplish it in a legal and safe way, which I highly recommend doing. But it just requires some legwork, some phone calls, some paperwork, or whatever that looks like for that particular situation. It can be done. It just takes the work and the time and the effort to do it. Now, with regard to actually filming a moving vehicle, that's something I'll be talking about in a later episode of this season of Filmmaking for Noobs, when we look at how to shoot a scene in a moving vehicle, either in real life or using what's called poor man's process. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Filmmaking for Noobs. I hope that this has given you some good tips and ideas to think about for how to get permission to film on a street in your area for your next film project. Thanks for watching Filmmaking for Noobs. More episodes coming next week. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. Let me know what you thought. Thanks for watching.